Welcome back. Sometimes the biggest secrets are hidden in the smallest details. Today, we're diving deep into just one verse from the Quran. On its face, it seems to lay out a very clear chain of command, but hiding in plain sight in its very grammar is a clue, a single missing word that might just turn everything we thought we knew on its head.
All right, so this is the translation you've probably seen 100 times. It seems super straightforward, right? You've got this clear three-step chain of command. Number 1, obey God. Number 2, obey the messenger. And number 3, obey those in authority. For centuries, this has been like the foundational verse for so much of Islamic law.
But, and this is where our little investigation really begins, what if the most important clue isn't what's in the verse, but what's missing? What if one tiny grammatical omission completely reframes our entire understanding of this command? That's the mystery we're cracking today. Okay, so first things first, let's really get a handle on the traditional view, because we're not just talking about some random verse here. This thing is a cornerstone, a foundational piece for how authority and obedience have been understood in mainstream Islamic thought for generations. And the takeaway from that traditional reading is pretty clear, right? It means believers are commanded to obey all three. So, historically, that's meant that the commands from rulers, the legal rulings from scholars, they're all seen as binding. It basically puts human authority on a level that's incredibly close to the revelation itself. A very neat, top-down structure. All right, now let's get into the evidence. This is where you start to see the cracks. When you take this verse, 459, and you put it side by side with other similar verses in the Quran, something just feels off. It doesn't fit the pattern. It's a total outlier, linguistically speaking. You see, when you scan through the rest of the Quran, a really clear pattern just jumps out at you. The command is always obey Allah and the messenger. It's this consistent recurring duo, over and over and over again. Obedience is tied directly to these two and only these two. And that's why 459 is such an anomaly. The rest of the book keeps that tight two-part command, but then bam, 459 throws in a third wheel, and those in authority among you. This is a huge break from a pattern that's been set in stone everywhere else. And for us, that's our first major clue that something here needs a much closer look. So, how do we solve this puzzle? Well, we have to go back to the source code, right? We have to look at the original Arabic. The clues aren't in complex theology. They're right there in the grammar of the sentence itself. It's a detective story, and the language is the crime scene. And the master key to this whole thing, it comes down to a single Arabic verb, atiru, which means obey. The way this verb is used, and even more importantly, where it's not used, is what changes absolutely everything. Okay, let's break this down grammatically. Pay close attention. The verse starts with ati'u Allah, obey Allah. The verb is there. Then it says wa ati'u ar-rasul, and obey the messenger. See that? The verb is repeated. But then, look what happens with the third part. When it gets to and those in authority, the verb ati'u is gone, vanished. It's just not there. And grammatically speaking, folks, that omission, that's the smoking gun. So here's the rule, and it's absolutely crucial. In Arabic grammar, when you repeat a command verb like that, it signals that each one is a separate, independent source of authority. So by repeating it for the messenger, his authority is cemented right alongside God's. But by omitting it for those in authority, the grammar is screaming at us that their authority is not independent. It's conditional, it's subordinate, it's a totally different category. And believe it or not, there's another piece to this puzzle. In other places where the Quran commands obedience to Allah and the messenger, the very next phrase is almost always fa'in, which means then if. It introduces a condition, like obey Allah and the messenger, then if you turn away. Now, at first glance, verse 459 seems to break that pattern too, by sticking those in authority in the middle. Or does it? Okay, so when we put these clues together, the missing verb and this weirdly broken sentence structure, a completely new way of reading the verse starts to come into focus. And it's a reading that, honestly, might just fix all of these problems in one clean move. Just look at this. It's all about where you put the period, metaphorically speaking. The traditional reading lumps all three together into one long command. But the revised reading, it actually respects the grammar. The command to obey stops after the messenger. Then, those in authority get moved into the next part of the sentence, becoming the subject of the clause that starts with, if you have a dispute. And that simple shift completely reframes the whole role of the Ulil-Amr, those in authority. They're no longer this third pillar of absolute obedience.
Instead, the verse is now identifying them as the very people you might have a dispute with, a dispute that, by the way, needs a higher court of appeal to be solved. And just like that, the puzzle is solved. The command to obey is back to being that consistent two-part command we see everywhere else, Allah and the messenger. The verse no longer breaks the pattern. The outlier is suddenly right back in line with the rest of the text.
Okay, but this, of course, brings up another huge question. If the only absolute obedience is to Allah and the messenger, how are we supposed to do that today? I mean, what does it actually mean to obey the messenger in the 21st century? Well, amazingly, the verse itself points us to the answer. It says that if you get into a dispute, even presumably with those very same authorities, you have to refer the matter back to Allah and the messenger. So that begs the question, right? How on earth do you refer a legal dispute to someone who passed away 1400 years ago?
The internal logic of the verse points to a beautifully simple solution. To refer to Allah has to mean referring to his revelation, the Quran. And so to refer to the messenger must mean referring to the one thing he was sent to deliver, which is again, the Quran. In the end, both roads lead back to a single destination, the text of the revelation itself.
And this idea is backed up all over the Quran by a key phrase used to describe the Prophet's entire mission, al-Balagh al-Mubin, which translates to the clear delivery or the clear conveyance. The text says again and again that his job was to deliver the message clearly and completely, not to add another layer of legislation on top of it. So to obey the messenger is to obey the message he delivered.
So let's zoom out. We've just gone on a pretty intense linguistic deep dive. What's the big picture here? Why does rejiggering one little verse matter so much?
Well, for a few huge reasons. First, it makes the Quran linguistically consistent with itself. No more weird outlier verse. Second, it totally clarifies the structure of authority. Human leaders are now subject to the text. They're not a source of law in and of themselves. This also powerfully affirms the Quran's own claim that it's complete and detailed enough for guidance. And finally, it creates a direct path for everyone. When there's a problem, you're empowered to go straight back to the source text for resolution.
And all of this leaves us with one last massive question to chew on. How does everything change when you locate ultimate binding authority in a text that anyone can read instead of in a hierarchy of people? What does that do to our approach to faith, to community, to governance? It suggests a very different model, one where every single person, from the ruler to the citizen, is held accountable to the very same words on a page. And that is a revolutionary idea.